Hey, welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast brought to you by Wilmington University. Wilm, you work. So glad you could join us here. Danny Pommells, along with NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com Sixers writer Noah Levick. Easy for me to say. I'm still trying to dissect all that's going on with these Philadelphia 76ers, Noah. Players are in, players are out. They're winning games, they're losing games. Um, you know, I want to avoid the recency bias to talk about what happened with the Magic and really look at this double OT game against the Timberwolves, where somehow D'Angelo Russell thought that he could talk smack after winning by 1 point in double OT afterward, which is really, I thought, a little bit poor class. But the Sixers are trying to figure this thing out. Let's look glass half full at least. They're a game over 500, Noah, and they're starting to, you look at that way Joel Embiid, it's going to be a little bit of the yin and the yang when you have him play 45 minutes and score 42 points and he comes 4 for 16 in the next game. Of course, his legs aren't going to quite be there. And the Sixers suffered a bit for it because they didn't quite have the identity that they needed against the Magic, a team that only had 4 wins. But Noah, do you feel like this is a Sixers team that is trying to figure it out and are taking the steps necessary to get back to where they were, considering all of the upheaval and what they've had to deal with?
As you said, that's the glass half full way to look at it. I think it's difficult to be quite that positive after the way we played against Orlando. But look, this happens. It's a long season. Sometimes it's not even easy to explain or understand why you turn in a stinker on a particular night. Certainly, the double OT game might be part of that explanation, although Doc Rivers didn't use that as an excuse last night. But look, that was a bad performance. I mean, Seth Curry said it best. They played bad basketball on both ends of the floor. It's just that simple. And they were fortunate that they were facing a very young 4-win team with a lot of injured players, and therefore managed to squeak by with the victory. I think we'll learn a lot more in terms of some of those sort of grander ideas you're talking about on this 4-game road trip coming up, where they'll play some good teams. And as Rivers said, similar performances against that opposition would lead to losses. But they will take the win. This would have been a very rough game to lose, and they'll move on and try to become better. But certainly in the big picture, it is good that they are certainly a healthier team. They've got their best player back, and as far as the on-court product, it needs to be a lot better than it was Monday night.
Yeah, I'll steal a quote from Doc Rivers last night. You'd rather win these than lose these. And particularly coming off the double OT loss where the game was in their grasp a few times, they get the victory over the Magic. And we'll put a little bit of this adversity in perspective because Joel Embiid comes back after his bout with COVID, where, hey, he said that he felt like he was on his deathbed, to paraphrase, his sentiments, and he was glad to come back. It didn't look like he was on his deathbed, considering the way he showed up and showed out, putting in 42 points and 14 rebounds against the Timberwolves, albeit in a loss. But that game and this game were the first back-to-back games where the Sixers have had all 5 of those starters from in the lineup outside of Ben Simmons. They've had 12 different starting lineups, and Doc Rivers did preface the season by saying he was going to throw some different lineups out there, and it might be different lineups on different nights. But it's been 27 days, Noah, since they last had their last home win. It was November 3rd against the Chicago Bulls. So 5-5 at home. The South Philly had been a fortress for this team over the last couple of seasons. So the COVID, the injuries, finally getting guys reacclimated. Um, they're motioning and moving toward that direction, and hopefully, like you said, this road trip will tell the tale and put things, in a better light than they have been, considering all that they've had to go through. But when you look at Embiid, you have to give him credit for, after the Timberwolves game, he said he had trouble getting up and down the floor when he was working out prior to that. I think he said that he got up and down the floor. He could get up and down about 3 times before feeling exasperated, to paraphrase. Um, and then you have this game against the Magic where he doesn't quite play his best, but you have to give him credit for the shape that he's in, because you can see that in years past where we, have really harped on the fact that he didn't quite have, his legs under him and wasn't quite, what he should be. But he has looked at in his best shape that we have ever seen him in my eyes. Do you agree with that, Noah? Because to me, he wouldn't been able to bounce back from such a horrible bout with COVID and hit the ground running like he did against Minnesota. Had a rough game last night. Really, shooting wise, was the issue. His touch wasn't quite there, as you mentioned in your 3 observations after the game on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. But you have to be optimistic, considering the long haul this team is trying to go on, and the fact that there's so many other mitigating factors. Joel does still look really good, in really good shape.
I agree. It appears to be the best shape he's ever been in, although I wouldn't have been ripping him if he wasn't in shape and if he was extremely winded because, as we've
He
said
had he had
before,
an out clause there, huh?
yeah, as we've said a million times, a lot of this is unpredictable and can be extremely difficult on people. And it's kind of funny. I think at times I felt almost sheepish mentioning like, look, the most important thing in the big picture here is this guy's health as a person, and you really hope that everyone recovers fully and gets out of this okay. And then you hear what Joel Embiid has to say, and you recognize that COVID can indeed have serious impacts, even on people who are vaccinated, even on people who are in, you know, better physical condition than 99.9% of the population. And um, so it is really important, I think, always to keep that in perspective and be aware of the human side of this, and that these people have families and all of that. And I think Joel Embiid served as a great reminder of that. And as always, we appreciate the candor and him sharing his experience, and are glad just outside of the basketball side of it that he is healthy again. But yeah, it's probably going to be up and down for a lot of these guys as they're coming back. I think that's even still worth remembering with Tobias Harris, who frankly hasn't looked great overall since his return. But Embiid, the Timberwolves performance, I think if they win that game, it's one of the most memorable special performances of his career. It still might rank up there even in a loss, in part because he was at his best in the overtimes, which doesn't make any sense on paper. You'd think maybe he starts strong and has a little emotional surge at the beginning of the game and then fades down the stretch, but he was hitting fadeaways and step backs in double overtime in that game and blocking shots and moving tremendously. And so the Sixers would have loved if that came in a winning effort. But nevertheless, he's back. And just his presence on the floor, of course, is invaluable for this team.
Other players that are back, Danny Green, although on a minutes restriction as he deals with this hamstring issue. You raised a good point in your 3 observations of the idea that Danny Green, a healthy Danny Green and a healthy Matisse Thybulle, brings up a little bit of a debate on who would be better suited in the starting lineup between those two guys. I felt like Doc Rivers in the Timberwolves game left Matisse in on offense late when I thought he shouldn't be on the floor, which surprised me a few times. There were times where D'Angelo Russell was subbed out on the defensive end for obvious reasons because there are better defenders on the Timberwolves team. But obviously, Matisse Thybulle has made some tremendous strides, and he also coming back from COVID, give him credit, has looked pretty good considering all the time that he's missed. Now, do you have a preference in that matchup of whether Danny or Matisse is better suited as a starter? Is there a personal preference there that you think the team benefits more from?
Well, firstly, to the Timberwolves game in particular, I mean, it is worth remembering again that the Green is on this restriction. So the Sixers just couldn't use him late in that game. I think the
Mhm.
preference would have been to do so, in part because he was very good in the third quarter and I think would have been Rivers' option down the stretch. I think it's a really interesting debate for down the line. I'm not, frankly, sold in either direction right now. I
Hmm.
think the Sixers, in a world, of course, where neither of those players are traded, uh, are probably better off in a spot where Thibault has proven he's a starter because there's no doubt that he's at least capable enough offensively and is respected enough offensively to be on the floor late in close games. But I'm just not sure he's going to get there this season. We shall see. And I think also it wouldn't shock me if even in the playoffs we're in a situation where it's matchup dependent, where if the Sixers love how Thibault begins games against a Bradley Beal or against a Jalen Brown or a star wing such as that, that Rivers likes him as the starter and likes him as the guy who can play late game defense. And maybe that's not the case in certain other matchups. So I think a world in which he starts, I would lean toward the Sixers are probably a better team, but I'm not so sure we actually get to that point this season. So we shall see.
It's clear the Sixers still need another piece. This Ben Simmons thing is still hanging over their head as an unresolved issue and a potential, as the trade deadline approaches here in February, a potential that he could be dealt more so now as the rubber kind of meets the road. I think the glaring issue for this team, and I think it was evident in the Timberwolves game in particular, particularly when you look at that last play with Joel Embiid, is the need of a closer. And they run the offense for that last play where Joel is catching the ball so far from the basket, and the action is pulling him away from the rim, and everyone in the arena knew he would be double teamed if he caught the ball, yet still he's their best option, most likely there at the end. Seth Curry was open. Tobias Harris was an option, but yet Joel was the one who caught the ball and had to make a choice. I think that need for a closer continues to be glaring, even though Tobias, has shown a propensity to make big shots, as has Seth Curry, has come along really well. He led them in scoring last night with 24 points. Do you see that same need for this team? And are you think that's something that they'll be able to address at some point, whether it be with a Simmons trade or however they handle that?
I think it's one area where they're probably not as strong as they'd like to be, but in
Did
all
you feel
honesty,
like that the Timberwolves game was evidence of that, or did that not?
I think that's
You didn't
probably
feel that same way.
probably a bit strong for me. I mean, I think Joel Embiid came up with a lot of really clutch buckets down the stretch, and I mean, give the Sixers credit. They did dig themselves a 20-point hole, but they got out of it and managed to force overtime in that game. So I'm not sure I'd go quite that far, but I'd agree. Like, if they want to be a legitimate championship contender, yeah, they have to execute better at the end of close games, and it would be helpful to have a perimeter shot creator, whether that's a number two star for Joel Embiid or more of a complementary sort of player who could slot into that role. But I'm just at the point now where it's only been 21 games, and I'm not so sure that I really confident can say, okay, this is this team's number one need, this is number two
Mhm.
need, this is number three need. I think we've known for a very long time that perimeter shot creation is a deficiency, and they'd be better if they address that in some form or the other. But it's tough for me to say that's where they're worse right now, or that's where they most urgently need to do something. In part because, look, without Ben Simmons, they're not a great defensive team, and I think, of course, they were even worse without Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. But um, you think about the playoffs, and are they going to be able to stop team X or Y? And I don't think the answer is a confident yes without Ben Simmons on the roster. So. Um, they're an imperfect team, like many squads, and Ben Simmons' absence sort of magnifies or exacerbates some of those issues.
Well, we're here at the quarter pole of the season, Noah, and I'll borrow some of your words because they need a perimeter scorer that doesn't have to be a closer. So those things can be mutually exclusive. But I think what I've noticed, and particularly, let's just look at that Timberwolves game, and yeah, it may be an outlier, but I have seen it other times where I feel like Tyrese Maxey, when Joel is out there, loses some of his aggressiveness sometimes and defers to Joel and ways that, you had that one play that I guess led to the loss by Maxey making the turnover, trying to make that bounce pass back to Joel on that high, action they had. And I feel like Maxey, like I said, loses some of his aggressiveness, and that is something that the team needs. Um, and if he's not going to provide it, they need someone on the floor providing that as much as possible. And Joel's likes to catch the ball on the perimeter. He likes to be on the outside a lot of times, and that can be good and bad. But so I think another player who can create on the perimeter does it have to be a closer? No, but another player who can create on the perimeter would bring that aggressiveness and maybe draw away some of those double teams as well to create more opportunities for the other guys. So yeah, it is tough to pinpoint exactly. These are the two or maybe three things this team needs to get over the hump. But we're at the quarter pole, Noah. Time waits for no man. We got an 82 game slate, all just about a quarter of the way through it, and they're going to have to figure some things out in order to get out of this basement. Right now, they're not even in the playoffs if they started today, which they don't. But at the same time, coming home where you were really stingy in the past and not quite being that, and then going back on the road, it's a tough, road to hoe. They go 2-4 on this road trip out west. They come back home and go 1-1, and then are back on the road for four more, starting in Boston, another game that isn't a gimme. So it can snowball quickly. And I know you don't seem to have those same concerns, but at the same time, playing winning basketball and getting it together is, you got to steal a few when you're at less than full capacity, and they haven't been able to do that quite as much as they should have. So they're above 500 now, though, and I'm definitely a glass half full type of guy. So I'm thinking optimistically, but looking for them to kind of get back to where they were. I mean, it's just such a familiar refrain, which we talked about, of last season 7-1, and then the COVID hit, and this season doing so well, and then COVID just ravages them, unlike any other team was ravaged so far. So it can be frustrating for Sixers fans. I'm looking for them to kind of piece it all together here sooner rather than later, though.
I wouldn't personally classify myself as unconcerned. I
Okay.
don't think they played well over the last two games, but for me, it's more. I just want to see more. I think everyone wants to see more of what the team looks like when it's actually healthy. And just the honest assessment is the Sixers have been healthy just on so few occasions this season. How much can we really know?
Right.
And
Right.
I guess you have to base a lot of your opinion or stance on this team on what we saw last postseason. And obviously, there were flaws executing late in games and holding leads, and those are issues they have not proven they've surmounted. But part of what's also tricky is some of those late game issues were very Ben Simmons specific, and now the team doesn't have Simmons, as you mentioned. Tyrese Maxey is its starting point guard, and uh, you do probably want to see him be more aggressive late in games, even when Joel Embiid is on the court. But I'm just not inclined to blast a 21-year-old kid too much for that specific issue when he's only had a handful of games with Joel Embiid as his starting center and a full complement of players around him. So just want to see more, just want to learn more. But absolutely not saying here that this team looks like a championship contender or that it's good news that they're 11-10 or that the road ahead is easy or any of that. They're not in a great spot. Doc Rivers believes in his team. He said pregame he just for whatever reason really likes this team and thinks they're going to figure some things out soon. Uh, time for them to prove it. Now that they've finally got a much more healthy roster.
We're going to talk some more about this Sixers team, specifically Tyrese Maxey. Tough shooting night last night, and the aggressiveness, I think, was put on the spotlight a bit because of something the Magic did. We'll get into that after this timeout and talk a little more Sixers after this.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilmU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
So, man, Tyrese Maxey, man, has been a treat to watch. Wasn't quite himself in this Magic game. And, he goes 2 for 12 from the floor. But once again, just a sparkling 9 assists, 0 turnover type of performance. So you kind of getting the best of both worlds as Maxey continues to show he can take care of the basketball and is ready for the prime time. But the Magic decided to go to a zone last night to try to dare the Sixers to make some outside shots and pack it in and try to, you got Mo Bamba back there swatting everything. And they tried to pack it in and dare the Sixers to hit some seams and things like that to try to break the zone down. And, okay, Seth Curry, Tyrese Maxey, probably the best guys who are going to be able to get into those little pockets and then draw defenders and then find shooters or what have you. And once again, Maxey 0 turnovers, but his aggressiveness hitting those seams and things like that and are going to be the thing that breaks down the zone. And maybe he didn't quite do that to the effect that the Magic thought that they should get out of the zone. And maybe he didn't do that quite to the effect to kind of put the Sixers in a better situation. And those are growing pains, but at the same time, the Magic were super desperate. They didn't have their top scorer. They didn't have Markelle Fultz. The Sixers should have played better, and it was frustrating to see Franz Wagner go bananas against them with 27 points and Eurostep them to death. But you let a team like that get a little confidence. They cause some turnovers and get some easy breakaway dunks and whatnot, and all of a sudden it's a different game. Do you feel like the zone frustrated them, and that's something that other teams might implore Noah, or we have seen it in the past as well with other teams, the Knicks come to mind, or do you think it was just a one-night type of thing where the Magic were a bit desperate to try to get back into the game or to try to steal one on the Sixers floor?
I'm sure they'll see more zone down the line. I wouldn't expect it to be an every night thing, in part because that's just not the norm in the NBA, and it's not something a lot of teams even practice regularly.
Right.
I think often one of the reasons a zone succeeds is the surprise element, and a team just, in all honesty, not being fully prepared for it. And that's how the Sixers looked last night. I got flashbacks to the stretch in December 2019 when we were having very similar sort of discussions after the Mavs and the Heat played zone against the Sixers. And part of the issue almost always for any half-decent NBA team is just you miss wide open shots and frustration compounds, and then
Right.
missing the shots leads to some hesitancy and tentativeness, and then you're making poor decisions and you're not being aggressive enough, or you're forcing the issue and you're turning it over, and that's leading to the other team getting transition offense. So there are very familiar patterns like of why teams fail against the zone, and it just felt like last night the Sixers were checking all of the negative boxes. I agree with you. Maxey probably deserves a bit of the blame. He's the team starting point guard. It's his job to strike the right balance when they're facing a relatively unfamiliar defense. It's funny, when you're watching a game there in person. Of course, you're generally focused on the floor, but sometimes your eyes drift to the sidelines a little bit. And last night was one of those where you couldn't help but look at Doc Rivers and see how exasperated he was with that performance. And one play in particular in the third quarter, Maxey just tried to shoot him out of it. Like Embiid, kind of screened for him on the wing, and he just shot a three without any
Mm.
passes. And you can basically hear Doc Rivers or very easily read his lips of like, move the ball, come on, just really not liking how the team was approaching it. But of course, I think the primary issue was they were moving the ball a bit too much and they were being too deliberate and they were trying to like break it in the perfect way, as opposed to just kind of playing a natural free flowing sort of basketball and playing with pace and running their offense. But then of course Rivers unhappy when, Maxey just decides to jack up a three as well, understandably. So not good. I would think that they'll review that tape and try to learn from what went wrong. That said, I don't think it is a grave long-term concern of, oh man, this team has an Achilles heel against the zone. But I'm curious to see how they will fare the next time another team turns to that defense.
Hey, with Maxey, we had a rough game last night, and the Sixers are on this Boston, Atlanta, Charlotte home and home road trip. But as rough as Maxey had it, Steph Curry had it going on once again, 10 of 13 from the floor. Just, I don't know if he's going to get all-star consideration, but when you look at his numbers, from three, from the free throw line, all on that 50, 40, 90 pace, it's hard not to have, a head turn and look his way. I don't know if he'll even get MIP, most improved player consideration, but he deserves some kudos, man, for the way he has progressed, the way he's continued to be so steady for the 76ers, and really a pleasure to watch. Hit that gigantic three in the corner when the Sixers needed it last night. Let's talk about Steph's progress, and what have you heard from the team and the players with how pleased and enjoyable they have been with how he's continued to perform. I think he had that golf is dope hat on after the game. So the guy is versatile. We know his brother can really play. I'm sure he gets out there and can strike it with the best of them, but maybe not the best of them, but the best of them in his realm. But just talk a little bit about Steph, man, because just been a pleasure to watch and see him come along. And I guess we really know who won that Jason Richardson trade.
For sure, the Sixers looking a little better in that Josh Richardson, Seth
No,
Curry.
Josh Richardson, excuse me.
Josh, yeah, Jason, different era there. But
Former Sixer?
yeah, indeed. No, he's been really good. I mean, last night was for sure an example where it wasn't just that he shot the ball at a high percentage. It just felt like damn near every one that he made they really needed and was extremely valuable. Both that one, which I believe put them up 4 late, and was badly required, and then a few in that third quarter where it felt like the sky was falling a little bit, and it really seemed like the Sixers were in the midst of a disaster, and they were hearing boos the loudest I've heard in that arena for definitely this season, probably, I guess, dating back to last postseason during some of those collapses. And Seth Curry bails them out, and he's done that a few times this season. As we said early in the year, when he had that scorching start, it feels relatively sustainable and normal for him. And I think his default answer whenever he's asked, like, after a game, hey, you shot the ball really well, what was the key? Essentially, it's always, I get good looks, I expect to make them. And I think, yeah, that sounds about right. It's Seth Curry. You give him an open shot, he's probably going to hit it. Of course, with him, I think an aspect that is encouraging and impressive for a guy who's over 30 years old is some of the skill handling the ball and facilitating continues to develop and seems to keep trending in a positive direction. And you see little nuances of that two-man game with Embiid evolving as they get more time together. I think there was a play last night in the first quarter where it looked like they were kind of run a handoff, and then Seth sort of darted in one direction, got the defense off balance, and got an easy jumper as a result. So little things like that obviously bring back memories of the Embiid JJ Redick days and some of that two-man chemistry. that is potent at times and was effective for the Sixers in that second round series against the Hawks as well. So yeah, credit to him for a great start to the season. And it looks like as the Sixers are currently constructed, they need him to be this sort of player who takes every open shot, doesn't pass up the ones that are available, and hits them at a really high rate like he has thus far.
Man, it feels good to have a Curry on your team. I will say that because, I mean, you look at the history of the Sixers and their type of shooters that have been, we had Kyle Korver, Dana Barros, comes to mind. I'm sure I'm overlooking somebody, but not a lot of like marksmen, you know what I mean, come to mind of people who have just impacted the franchise the way potentially Seth Curry can here. And for a dude who's bounced around from team to team and hasn't quite found a home, he came here with the idea that he wanted to prove that he's more than just a shooter. And man, this is his season so far. And last season could have been his season if he didn't get, bit with the COVID bug. But man, just a pleasure to watch. One of those dudes. I mean, at this point, you're thinking the shot's going in every time. I mean, I don't think anybody out there would disagree with that because just the rhythm, the stroke, the way he sets his feet, the shoulders are square, the whole bit. And let's throw his numbers out there so we can be accurate. On the regular season, he's shooting 51.2%, 91.5% from the free throw line, 41.7% from three. Yeah, that'll be tough to do for a whole season. I mean, Tobias Harris came close but didn't do it last year. I think Grant Williams for the Celtics is on that pace right now as well. But let's just, put it in perspective with the 76ers. He's not looking as prolific as Seth Curry. But, hey, let's just, cross our fingers, hope it continues, and continue to enjoy the performances that we're seeing because the Sixers have needed them as they did last night against Orlando, and they're going to need them on this road trip for sure as they try to reclaim their identity.
Well, I would expect the 3-point shooting to at least be that high. I mean, that's below his career average. Like, let's keep that in perspective. So, no, that's not unrealistic. I think just part of the question is what he can do with this increased usage and how that pairing with Joel Embiid is going to develop over time. But no, this is the player Seth Curry is, and team's grateful to have him, no question.
All right, let's take a timeout and get to this last topic as this road trip. Sixers once again will not be in South Philly for a bit, but all is well. They're coming around. They're above 500, which they hadn't been, and they are not in a situation where they are in a situation where they're so shorthanded that they can barely field a roster, which they almost were in several situations. So let's take a timeout and talk a little bit more after this.
There's so much to explore in Valley Forge in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Montgomery County is composed of charming towns and main streets, and each with its own personality, style, and unique vibe. Whether you are looking to get away with family or enjoy a special trip with friends, leave behind the stress of planning and use our guide to find some of the most amazing things to do. Explore which town and main street suit you best. Visit makeitmainstreet.com to plan your getaway today.
Noah, we would love a 4-0 road trip. We would love a 3-1 road trip. But, what we want is not always what we get. They got a national game mixed in against the Atlanta Hawks on Friday. Charlotte is no pushover. They did lose to the Bulls last night in a showdown of the Ball brothers. First things first is Boston, though, which is always a tough go for the Sixers. It's Boston. I mean, what else we need to say? Although they aren't playing that well. They aren't doing that great. They are definitely vulnerable. They are coming off a win against the Raptors. I feel like this Boston game is going to be a tough win. I want to be optimistic and think that this is a team that they can get by, but they have an identical record. They've also had injury issues that they've had to overcome. But a division game against an opponent that you mortally hate, the Sixers need to get this one. Do you feel like there is a path to success for them, even though they're still trying to come together? And I'm sure you do think there's a path to success, but do you feel like this is a road trip that they can come out and build momentum, 3-1, 4-0 type of road trip?
4-0 would surprise me big time. 3-1 wouldn't shock me. Probably 2-2 feels most probable. Is how I would assess it heading in. But yeah, no doubt Boston should be a winnable game. We'll get in some of those 2019-20 Sixers flashbacks with Ime Udoka, Boston's new coach, Al Horford, Josh Richardson. But yeah, definitely that team hasn't started the season too well. And for the Sixers, you'd hope that these last couple of performances, I would say, even though they won it, especially the game against Orlando, are mini wake up calls, perhaps, of like that standard's just not good enough. And the body language last night, when they finally sealed that win, to me suggests that was the case. That a lot of players understood deeply that they didn't play well and were lucky to get out of there with the win. And perhaps that leads to better effort and just more intensity in games where the opposition is higher. But yeah, heading in 3-1, I think that they would be thrilled with that. 4-0, something greater than thrilled, highly elated. And 2-2 would be okay. But yeah, no easy games in this trip, and going to be tested for sure.
Man, the Sixers are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Let's see how they deal with this adversity and come out hopefully on the high side of it. We will be with you every step of the way here on the Sixers Talk podcast. We're going to get out of here, but no, anything we didn't cover or get to, or anything you're working on the website that you want to mention?
I think we covered most of it. Yeah, we'll have some kind of big picture stuff leading into this road trip. Kind of starting Wednesday morning, but I think we covered most of it. We don't want to downplay like how great what Joel Embiid did was. So hopefully we didn't do that. I mean, 42 points, 14 rebounds after he said he thought he wasn't going to make it. Like that's a pretty big deal. That's pretty special. So we do appreciate that, even if we didn't speak about it for a long time. So. Yeah, look, this is a special player and a special person that the Sixers are lucky to have on their team.
He is Noah Levick. I am Danny Pommells. Ben Barry, our esteemed producer in the wings, and we appreciate you listening here on the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilmU Works. We'll see you next time.